I'm a history and philosophy teacher at Liceo Casiraghi. It's a real pleasure to have with us David Quammen within our high school's events for civic education. So thank you very much for having accepted to come to this meeting at Liceo Casiraghi. David Quammen is a well-known scientific author and journalist whose books included The Song of the Dodo, The Reluctant Mr. Darwin, Spillover, and the latest, The Tangled Tree. Among them, Spillover will be central to our today's discussion. Quammen has also published articles in magazines such as Harper's, National Geographic, Rolling Stone. He has been honored with an Academy Award from the American Academy of Art and Letters and is a three-time recipient for the National Magazine Award. So after this, what else can I say? Only a few other words. David Quammen graduated at Oxford, studied literature, concentrating on the works of William Faulkner. And as a matter of fact, he writes very well. And then he became a science writer and explorer all around the world. I think he's a great example of the power of curiosity and imagination that move the human mind without distinction between humanities and scientific subjects. What Aristotle called wonder, and what makes us human beings. Now, I give the floor to our distinguished guest. Please, Dr. Quammen.
Grazie mille, Rita. Thank you very much. And thank you all. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of your class today. And Rita, I especially liked what you said about the connection between the humanities and science. It's very important, I think, that people not consider those two separate disciplines, but two legs on a table that help us understand the world, and that they each are are much better understood if they are pursued with an appreciation of the other. They work together wonderfully well to help us understand the world. So there's no reason anyone has to say, I'm a scientist, I don't read poetry, I don't read novels, or I'm a poet, I'm a novelist, I'm a literature teacher, I don't read science. No, together, those things work together.
So it's very nice and very wonderful to read your book, David. So, thank you, David, if I can say this. In Italian, we are more how we say, more formal, not David, but Dr. Quammen. But David is better.
David is fine. David, please.
Okay, thank you. As I told you, our students have prepared many questions. Alessia is the first.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you. My question is coronavirus an emerging disease or a re-emerging disease?
Or what? Or a re-emerging disease?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a very good question. Because we have an abundance of both of those. We have newly emerging diseases coming at us more and more in recent decades, but we have re-emerging diseases. In this case, COVID-19 is a genuinely emerging disease because, as they said back in January when we first heard about this, it's being caused by a novel coronavirus. Do you remember that? A novel coronavirus. I don't know how to say that in Italian, but that indicated that this particular virus has never been seen in humans before. The virus, of course, is called SARS-CoV-2 now, SARS coronavirus number 2, never before seen in humans. Everything comes from somewhere. So a newly emerged virus seen in humans for the first time has to come from another form of host. And therefore, we know that this is a virus that must have come out of a wild animal, because the viruses that animals carry are much more likely to be able to infect humans than the viruses that plants carry or the viruses that fungi carry. So this is a new virus emerged from a wild animal, probably a bat, but we don't know that for sure, and possibly having passed through another kind of animal before it got into humans. Those are very important questions that scientists are working on now, and that I'm very interested in, and I'll be following those scientists as closely as I can as they study those questions. Just which animal did this virus come from, and how did it spill over into humans? Very important to answer those questions in order to protect ourselves from the next one, and also to understand this virus better. So thank you for that question, Alessia.
I would like to ask you if, considering your knowledge of how deadly viruses spread in the past and how viruses impacted through horizontal gene transfer, the evolution of life forms on the planet would have been better to let the virus spread, eventually protecting elder people, or to follow actual strategy to wait for a vaccine, which for a RNA virus is a primer, or disrupting economies and people's lives.
Yeah, well, that's a very complicated question. Viola Tekla, is that right? Am I saying your name right? Very complicated question. And I'm going to leave aside the subject of horizontal gene transfer right now. I discussed that throughout my most recent book, The Tangled Tree, L'albero intricato. But the subject of spillover of dangerous viruses into humans mostly does not involve that. It involves a number of other questions, including what you asked about herd immunity. How do we deal with this virus now? What is the best way to deal with it? Is the best way to deal with it to let it rage through human populations so that many of us get the virus and recover from the virus and then are immune to the virus, so that we eventually have what they call herd immunity, or protect ourselves in other ways with rigorous public health measures, with closing economies, with closing businesses, with closing schools, wearing masks all the time, developing vaccines. The answer, as far as I'm concerned, is that we must take those measures to protect ourselves. We can't rely on herd immunity, because if we do, millions of people will die. Mostly old people, people with secondary conditions, health troubles, some young people, some children. This virus has a case fatality rate on average maybe around 1%, although in some places it has been much higher. In Italy, in March, it was much higher. I know it was in some places in the north, around 14%, I think. So 14 out of every 100 people who were getting it then died. That's a terrible price to pay for herd immunity. It's an unacceptable price. Even 1 out of 100 is an unacceptable price if we can do other things and protect ourselves. Vaccination. Now we're starting to have vaccines becoming available. We need to persuade people to get the vaccines. There are three big challenges. One was developing vaccines, doing the science. Second is manufacturing vaccines in millions of doses. And third is persuading people to get the vaccine and to have their children vaccinated. So now we're in the second and third phase of those challenges. And I've heard that in Italy, there's maybe 20% of the population or 30% who don't want to be vaccinated. In the US, they're saying 40%. That is a terrible problem. And we need to solve that with education, with communication, with reassurance, with transparency, persuading people that getting vaccinated is the right thing to do, not just for themselves and for their children, but for their neighbors and their neighbors' children and the grandparents of their neighbors' children. We need to get people vaccinated.
My question is, are epidemics commonly associated with some kind of divine punishment or maybe witchery or even a conspiracy? And what do you think about these opinions?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes, that people tend to bring magical beliefs to any dramatic event, including a horrible event like a pandemic or an outbreak of disease. There are ethnic peoples in Africa who have suffered Ebola, and they have carried magical beliefs about how Ebola might be, the terrible Ebola virus disease might be something that involved magic, people putting curses on someone else because of jealousy. Because they have very poor health care, their educational opportunities have been low, and they haven't learned about the science of viruses. But even in countries like Italy and the US, there are people who want to believe the dramatic explanations, the sinister explanations, the conspiracy theories, the unscientific ideas about viruses or disease and where they come from. And so there are conspiracy theories all over the world about COVID-19. Was it manufactured in a laboratory? Was it manufactured by the CIA to hurt China? Was it manufactured by China to hurt the rest of the world? Expert virologists and molecular biologists who have studied the genome of this virus have said, no, this virus was not manufactured in a laboratory. This virus was manufactured in nature. And nature is manufacturing viruses that are similar to this all the time. Wild animals, especially bats, are filled with viruses that look very much like this virus. Not exactly like this virus, but close enough to persuade us that this virus comes from wild animals, probably from bats. I mentioned already the problem of denying science, and one of the worst consequences of denying science is that people prefer conspiracy theories and magic because they're more exciting, they're more dramatic. Science can be very dramatic too, and if people had a chance to learn it beginning when they're young, they would see not just the beauty and the power in science, but the drama in science, the mystery and the solving of mysteries in science. And that's one of the things I tried to do in my book Spillover, is to show that scientific investigation and discovery are a series of mystery stories that are being solved by courageous people who study the evidence and draw rational conclusions. So I hope that we are moving more and more toward that, and we will be able to dispense with these conspiracy theories and deal with the realities of this virus.
You have asked Alan Hunzi and Kelly Warfield, why did they? So now we want to ask you the same question. Why do you like your dangerous job? Have you ever been afraid of being infected and of natural dangers? Have you ever thought in particular situations to quit your job?
I love my job so much, I have never thought about quitting it. I go into places where scientists go. Sometimes they're dangerous. Have I been afraid? No, but I've been cautious. In some cases, maybe a little afraid and excited. But whenever I've gone into these situations with scientists, I make a point of following all the guidance that the scientists give me, taking the same precautions that the scientists take. If the scientists are wearing coveralls and 3 layers of medical gloves and a mask and goggles and rubber boots, then I wear a mask and goggles and rubber boots and 3 layers. And then while the scientists handle the bats, I stand 4 feet behind them with my notebook, writing notes and making sure that they don't hand me a bat, that they don't hand me a needle. I let them do the work that is most dangerous, and I stand at a safe distance behind them. It's a pleasure to be in those situations with them. They are very, very serious people. They love life, courageous men and women. And it's a thrill for me to be able to go into those places with them.
My question is, people usually think that the activity of the science communicator is very easy, but to maintain together the scientific rigor and the disclosure necessary to write such a book is not so easy. So how did you manage?
It's not so easy. You're right, Rebecca. It's not so easy. The job of the science communicator is to be accurate and clear, to remember always what it looks like to the reader, to think with every sentence and every paragraph, does the reader understand this? Does the reader care about this? Is the reader getting tired of me talking about this particular subject? Is the reader confused? To think about the reader, but also to think about the science and the scientists. So you're looking at the reader on one side and you're looking at the scientist on the other side. You're in between. The scientist is assembling piles of data, complicated theories that have exceptions within the exceptions, and then another exception within that exception. And your job as a science communicator is to understand that and then to some degree simplify it, but always remaining accurate. In English, I think of this as the balance between 2 words, precision and accuracy. Precision and accuracy. You have to reduce the precision of what you're saying, but without ever reducing the accuracy. And then you communicate to the reader, but there's another job too. You have to be interesting. You have to tell stories. People want to read about people. And even when they're reading about science, they want to read about people doing science. So you look for stories, you look for characters, you look for narrative, you look for suspense, and you take the scientific information and the theories and you animate them with stories, with narrative, with character. Always, always, always remaining accurate and true to the factual information and the real quotes that you hear from the scientists. It's not easy, but it's a lot of fun.
My question is, what does it mean not having found the coronavirus patient 0, unlike SARS?
Yes, well, it's a problem. We don't know patient 0. We don't know which human was the first to be infected with this virus. And therefore, we don't know how this virus got from a wild animal into a human. And therefore, we don't know how to protect ourselves from this virus spilling over again, or from another virus like this spilling over into humans. So it is a problem, and that's, I mentioned detective work, and that's where some of the detective work comes in. There are scientists whose job is to go out when there is a spillover of a new disease, and it causes an outbreak, like the outbreak we saw in Wuhan, China, which began at just a few hospitals with a few dozen cases, and then spread throughout the city and throughout the province and got to the airport and spread across the world. It all begins with one case, with one spillover from a non-human animal into a human. And until we know who that human was and what that man or woman did to become infected, then we can't solve the whole problem. We can't fully understand how this virus works, and we can't protect ourselves against similar viruses in the future. But it's always hard to know the real patient zero. Even for the AIDS pandemic, we don't know who the real patient zero was. I write about this in Spillover in the long chapter, The Chimp in the River. With SARS-1 in 2002 and 2003, we now know where the virus came from, but we don't know exactly how it first got into humans. We have some suspicions. And with this one, we think the virus came from a bat, but the bat was probably in southern China, and Wuhan is in central China. So how did the bat, or at least the virus from the bat, get to the city of Wuhan? We don't know. Some people have said it was in that wet market, the Huanan wholesale seafood market. But we know now that there were cases in Wuhan early on, December 1st of last year, that had no connection with that market. So the virus seems to have gotten to the city of Wuhan in some way other than a wild animal being brought to that market. We need to solve that mystery. It's a big question.
Okay, now Tommaso. Tommaso.
Good afternoon. My question is, how much does genetic proximity among species matters in a spillover?
I missed one word, Tommaso. How much does genetic
proximity among species matter in a spillover?
Genetic diversity among species?
Yes, yes. Genetic proximity.
Oh, genetic proximity.
Yes.
It matters a lot, genetic proximity in a spillover. That's why we don't have pandemics caused by viruses that come from plants. The viruses that infect humans and cause disease, and in some cases cause epidemics or pandemics, have all come from animals, and almost all of them from mammals, because we are mammals. Once you get within the order, the class of mammals, then we're learning that genetic proximity is complicated. If it were absolutely the determining factor, then all of our dangerous viruses would come from primates, from monkeys and apes. Some of them do, but a lot of them come from bats. A lot of them come from rodents. So bats and rodents have enough genetic proximity to humans for viruses, some viruses, to be able to jump from bats or rodents into humans. Some viruses, the viruses that have a high degree of evolutionary flexibility, like influenza viruses, like coronaviruses. Actually, influenza viruses have so much flexibility that most of them come not from mammals, but from birds. The influenza viruses come from wild aquatic birds that pass into domestic birds like chickens and ducks, and then from those animals, sometimes into pigs, sometimes into humans, sometimes into pigs, and then two influenzas mix and swap sections of their genomes and then come out and infect humans. So genetic proximity is important, but the evolutionary flexibility of viruses is also very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now,
According to David Heyman, studying the origin of a virus, HIV specifically, is a distraction which has no scientific value. generates confusion among the public and doesn't help to solve any problems. In the early stages of the pandemic, it looked like most people were only interested in figuring out whether the virus arose from a Chinese lab or a Wuhan market. Do you agree with Heyman when he argues that knowing a virus's origin isn't useful? Why have you chosen to investigate the origins of viruses?
Yeah. Well, I have high respect for David Heyman, but he's wrong on that. And it doesn't matter that I'm saying he's wrong, but there are brilliant scientists in many parts of the world who are saying he was wrong. People like Andrew Rambeau and Beatrice Hahn and Edward Holmes at the University of Sydney in Australia, and other people who are pointing out that it is very important for us to understand the origins of viruses so that we can prevent further spillovers of viruses in the future. And also so we can understand better how the viruses have evolved. To say that it's not important where the virus came from is to say that human pandemics are just a medical problem, an engineering problem. All we have to do is figure out how this virus is making people sick and how we can create a vaccine against it. And that is a short-term responsive view that will always take each new pandemic as a completely independent event, as something that has happened to humans. And, okay, there's a fire, we've got to put out the fire. It doesn't take into account the broader causes and the pattern. The fact that the increase in spillovers of zoonotic animal origin viruses is part of a pattern that has increased in the last 60 to 80 years, and it reflects things that we humans are doing. We are disrupting the natural world. We are coming in contact with these viruses by destroying ecosystems and capturing and killing wild animals, giving viruses the opportunity. So what David Heyman is saying is fine if you're just a doctor or a public health official and you're interested in vaccines and human medicine. But if you're interested in the whole global problem of pandemic disease happening one after another, Ebola, Marburg, Nipah, Hendra, SARS-1, Zika, MERS, SARS-2, avian influenza. If you're interested in the pattern, then you need to be interested in the origins of the viruses as well as simply how to treat them in humans, I would say, with all due respect to David Heyman.
Good afternoon. Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
My question is, how did you live the 80s and the 90s period in which there was a great increase in number of people with the AIDS? Moreover, the doctors didn't know what the disease was, how to cure it, and how to stop it spreading. So it's more of a personal question, but...
So you're in the 80s and 90s, yes, there was this huge increase in AIDS cases, this new disease that had been discovered, recognized in 1981. But it was a virus, we slowly came to understand that it was a virus that had been in the human population much longer than that, since the early 20th century. And this was understood thanks to scientific work looking for the origins. People like Beatrice Hahn and Michael Warby, I described their work in Spillover, tracing the virus to a very similar virus that was carried by chimpanzees and spilled over from a single chimpanzee into a single human back around 1908 in the southeastern corner of Cameroon in Central Africa, give or take a margin of error. Very, very different from what we thought we knew about the origins of AIDS, which is that it just suddenly started appearing in gay men in 1980 and 81. Understanding the origins of that virus was one of the most important things in terms of humanizing the AIDS problem, in terms of people understanding that this is a human problem and not a problem of gay men. That it's a problem that we all own, we're all subject to, we're all affected by. Because the original spillover from a chimpanzee into a human had nothing to do with gay men in New York or Los Angeles. It had to do with, as far as we can infer, with humans hunting chimpanzees and killing them for meat and becoming exposed to the blood of a chimpanzee that carried a virus that got into a single human, probably through a cut, and became the virus that we now call HIV-1. So again, a curiosity to understand the origins is something that helps us understand not just a particular disease, but the broader causes of diseases coming from non-human animals and getting into humans. I would say that there are few things in the last 100 years that have increased our understanding of the human relationship with the natural world more than these terrible infectious diseases and the scientific study of the origins of these infectious diseases. It has taught us a huge amount about the consequences of humans living on this planet as though we owned every single corner of it. And that's been an important increase in our wisdom.
My question is, did the prejudice against homosexuality delay the beginning of the HIV researches?
That's an easy one to answer, unfortunately, Alessia, and the answer is yes. Yes, yes, yes. Prejudice against homosexuals during the presidency of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s was important. Ronald Reagan didn't even mention the disease for the first 6 or 7 years of his presidency, I think. He wouldn't even speak about the disease. And there were people back then who were trying, in the US, were trying to organize a scientific response, trying to get money for research. It was very difficult because at first this was thought of, there was a term in English, the gay plague. The gay plague. It's their problem. It's not our problem. Wrong. So there were people who were fighting. There were activists. There were gay activists like Larry Kramer, who was fighting, creating an organization to fight for more research on the AIDS pandemic. And there were people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is now, I don't know if he's famous in Italy. He's certainly famous in the US. He is a trusted and an honorable medical scientist who has been one of Donald Trump's advisors, but Donald Trump doesn't listen to Tony Fauci. Back in the 1980s, Tony Fauci was there trying to say, let's research this. This is not just the problem of gay people. This is everybody's problem. We need to research this and understand this. But he was fighting against the political and conservative social biases, and it was very difficult at the beginning.
Good morning.
Morning, Sophia. Good afternoon.
Your thought about our animal nature is very clear. In particular, it affects the vision of a human being as a sort of explosive pandemic, destined in some way to decrease over time. Whether we like it or not, all of us are now aware of it. And I would like to ask you if, in your opinion, this awareness may have contributed in some way to promote, to influence the spread of anti-scientific feeling, mood that we see daily. I'm thinking about no mask movements or demonstrations against the vaccine. And what's your opinion?
Yes, well, you said at the beginning our animal nature, and that itself was a controversial idea at first. When Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of species and announced his theory of evolution back in 1859, he was implicitly saying that humans are animals, we are mammals, we have descended from ancestors, animal ancestors, through a process of natural evolution. Very controversial then, because people wanted to think that humans are special. Humans are godlike. Humans are not animals. We have been created specially by God for an elevated role on planet Earth. So when Darwin said, well, we're part of evolution, we have evolved from other animals. Look at how similar we are to chimpanzees. Look at how similar we are to gorillas, etc. In so many ways. There was resistance to that. People could accept the idea maybe of lizards evolving from amphibians and amphibians evolving from fish, but not the idea that humans have evolved. So it was very difficult from the beginning, and it continues to be difficult. I'm trying to remember the other part of your question, that the second part of your question, and where I should go with this. Can you remind me?
Okay, I would like. Okay, I want to ask if, in your opinion, this awareness, because now the information has made it very clear that we are animals, and I will ask you if in your opinion, this awareness have contributed in some way to the spread of anti-scientific
Yes. Right. Now I remember. Yes. Well. Yes, absolutely. Because some people still don't want to accept the idea of Darwinian evolution, and that's part of it. Again, I don't know the numbers in Italy, but the numbers in the U.S. are also around 40%. Around 40% of the American public does not want to accept the idea that humans have evolved from other life forms, and this has been shown by poll taking over the last 30 or 40 years, and it has stayed steady. About 40% or a little bit more of Americans say, no, I don't accept the idea of humans having evolved. So that shows you this resistance to science. It's not just a disinterest in science. It's a fear of science, fear of some of the things that science will say that challenge our feeling of specialness and our most conservative religious beliefs and dogmas. Science isn't completely in conflict with religion. There are a lot of scientists who are religious, but the most conservative dogmas of religion do conflict with scientific interpretations. And some people, for that reason, fear science. And so they invent other non-scientific explanations for things that that are happening, and also they invent other explanations because they feel that they feel a hunger for drama, for explanations that are more dramatic, more exciting than the real explanations. And so they concoct conspiracy theories. I've said this before, maybe I even said it a few minutes ago here, that, you know, science is exciting enough. Science is, the practice of science is filled with mysteries and the solving of mysteries. We shouldn't need conspiracy theories to keep us interested in these subjects such as emerging disease, because the scientific work itself is filled with drama, filled with men and women solving mysteries. But some people, they don't have patience for that. They want the conspiracy theories because it's more exciting to say that this virus was engineered in a laboratory by the CIA in a secret plot to hurt the people of China. It's more exciting. It's like some people like very, very sweet wine. Now, very, very sweet wine, if you drink enough of it, is going to be very bad for your head. But they don't have the patience to say, well, here's a very, very nice, dry red wine that goes beautifully with my dinner. They prefer the things that give the thrill of a sugary, sweet wine instead of the mature appreciation of a nice, dry Italian red or white wine.
Good morning. So, the WHO has used the term infodemic to refer to the widespread circulation of information about the coronavirus that is either sensationalist or outright false. Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier has gone on record as saying that the coronavirus is the result of a botched experiment by Chinese scientists, despite there being no substantial evidence to back up his claims. Do you think that Luc Montagnier is entitled to sharing his opinions, even though they might be unfounded as of now? And as a public figure, do you feel a special responsibility to make sure that the information you share and you provide to others is accurate? Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Stefano. I'll answer the second part first. Yes, I absolutely, if I'm a public figure, I don't know, but I absolutely feel a responsibility to be careful about what I say, to state things based on evidence that I've seen and the analysis of scientists that I trust. So yes, I feel a great responsibility, and the WHO is right that there is an infodemic as well as a pandemic, a viral pandemic, and it's a problem. We have all of these crazy ideas flying around for the reasons that I just described. People want drama, people want sweet wines, and that is impeding research, and it's going to impede the effort of getting people vaccinated. It's going to have terrible effects. So Luc Montagnier, he's a special case. You know, won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the AIDS virus. A very brilliant man. I've never met him. I've never interviewed him. I think he's very wrong on this. I think this is not something that he has directly studied. I have talked to a lot of scientists who are probably equally brilliant as he is, although they haven't won Nobel Prizes. And they have studied this. They've studied the genomics of coronaviruses, which is something Montagnier has not done. And they say this is not an engineered virus. So I think that that Luc Montagnier is incorrect and probably somewhat ignorant and somewhat overconfident in saying what he has said. Does he have a right to say it? Yes, he does have a right to say it, but I think he also has a responsibility to be more careful than he has been about saying things that are almost certainly harmfully wrong about this virus. Everybody has a right to speak. But if you've won a Nobel Prize in science, then you have a special responsibility to weigh your words carefully and weigh the impact of your words. And in this case, I don't think Luc Montagnier has done that.
Good evening.
Hi, Georgia.
My question is, bats are the reservoir host for enterovirus, and some people think it's the same for coronavirus. So what do you think about, and why always bats?
Why always bats? Well, first of all, coronavirus, Hendra virus, as you say, reservoir host is bats. Nipah virus, reservoir host is bats. Marburg virus, reservoir host is bats. Ebola virus, we don't know for sure, but possibly bats. And there are others. SARS-1 in 2002 and 2003 was traced to bats. And this virus, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, probably comes from bats. There is evidence that there are viruses quite similar to this virus that are living in bats in southern China. Quite similar does not mean identical, so we haven't found exactly the virus in bats that became this virus, but scientists have only sampled a small portion of the bats and the viruses, and so they still hope to find it. Why bats? Bats seem to be implicated more than their share as reservoir hosts of dangerous viruses. But it's important to remember that bats are one of the very, very most diverse orders of mammals. There are 1,400 species of bat. That means that 1 in every 5 species of mammal on planet Earth is a bat. 1 in 5. So, although they seem to be overly represented, maybe they're not overly represented. They're just overly represented in mammal diversity. The only group of mammals, the only order of mammals that are more diverse are the rodents. And there are a lot of viruses that come out of rodents too, because there are so many different kinds of rodents. But bats are different. Bats fly. Bats live long lives, much longer than rodents generally for their size. Bats live in huge collective roosts. You might find 60,000 or 100,000 little bats roosting on the wall of a cave, all packed together. All of those circumstances are conducive to retaining viruses in populations, passing viruses through populations. You know, they live a long time. They roost close together. What else did I say? They fly. Okay, the fact that they fly might be related to the fact that they have immune systems that are different from the immune systems of most mammals. Their immune systems are more tolerant of strange presences, strange viruses, bacteria, infections, any sort of an unidentified particle in the bat's body. The immune system doesn't react to it as strongly as the immune system of a human or the immune system of a rodent. Why is that? Possibly because they fly. This is the latest theory on this. The fact that they fly puts a huge amount of stress on their physiology. Their heart has to beat so quickly. Their metabolism has to move so quickly. And doing that has a tendency to release molecules in their bodies that their immune system would react to if they had a sensitive immune system. And they would have autoimmune disease. So bats have evolved immune systems that tend to ignore strange molecules in their bodies, and that includes viruses. So they seem to carry more viruses without getting sick, without reacting strongly with their immune systems and trying to clear those viruses out. They simply let those viruses exist in their bodies at relatively low concentrations. But then when those viruses spill over into humans, that situation changes, and we have a different sort of immune system, and the virus has a new opportunity. So the virus sometimes becomes a terrible problem, replicating abundantly, transmitting from one human to another and causing disease. So bats are very special for those reasons, and that seems to be why they are so often involved in these emerging diseases.
During your travels, there are some specific objects you always bring with you, some lucky charms, for example. Thank you.
There are some things that I always bring with me. Not lucky charms, but important little tools, and things that make life more pleasant when you go into a jungle looking for viruses, for instance. I always bring duct tape. I always bring iodine, because if you get a cut or a scratch, or if you're hiking through the jungle wearing sandals and shorts, your legs are constantly getting scratched up. And so I did this when I did my first big assignment in the Congo, walking across the Congo with a scientist for weeks and weeks 20 years ago. I learned that my feet would get all torn up. We were in sandals and shorts because we were crossing swamps, crossing rivers and things. You couldn't wear long pants. You couldn't wear boots. And so you were constantly getting these little wounds. And I found that if we would wash each night, I would climb into my tent, and then early in the morning, I would paint all my wounds with iodine. And then I would put little pieces of clean paper over the wounds and then put duct tape over them, even on my feet. I would duct tape my feet before I put on the sandals. And that would protect me for a day. So I never go anywhere without duct tape and iodine. I never go anywhere without my favorite coffee cup and some coffee. I never go anywhere without my binoculars, without my little notebook. I always have a notebook like that. It's just small enough that it'll fit into a Ziploc bag. And I can put the notebook and a pen in a Ziploc bag, put a rubber band around it. I always carry rubber bands on my wrist. And then I can protect my notes. And we can walk through a swamp, and we can swim across a lake, and we can wade across a Blackwater river. And because I've got my little notebook wrapped in its Ziploc bag with a rubber band around it, my notes are safe. That's about it. Oh,
thank you.
I always take a book. I always take a good book to read. I always take a good book to read at night in the tent, and I take a headlamp so I can read the book at night in the tent. And when I'm walking across the jungle, I don't read about science. I read literature. Back to what we were saying, what Rita and I were saying about the connection between science and literature. It's very important to me to stay connected to literature. Here's what I'm reading right now.
Manzoni.
Manzoni, yes. I've never read Manzoni before, and I've heard, and I know it's a great classic. And it also it's about a pandemic too, part of it. So I'm reading I Promessi Sposi each evening. And if I were in a jungle, I would be reading it too. I'd have my little headlamp, and I'd be there in the tent, for a half an hour before I fall asleep, reading Manzoni.
My question is, are you going to write a sort of sequel to Spillover in which you will describe the latest pieces of news about the viruses of Spillover?
I am going to write a new book about COVID-19. My publisher has asked me. I was working on a different book at the beginning of this year, and my book publisher asked me if I would do a book about COVID-19. It's a difficult challenge for two reasons. One, usually when I choose a book subject, I choose something that other people are not paying attention to, other people are not writing about. I like to write books about things that other people are not writing books about. When I wrote Spillover, published in 2012. Some people thought I was crazy talking about viruses that come out of animals. Who cares? Who cares? Well, how important could that be? And it became important. But now to write a book about COVID-19 is to go into a very crowded space where a lot of other writers are working on books about COVID-19. I have to figure out how to write a book that is uniquely valuable. The other problem is travel. When I research a book, my first principle is go there. You know, if you're going to write about viruses emerging from bats in the Congo that affect gorillas, go there, go see it. If it's a matter of bats in caves in southern China, go there with a scientist, climb through the cave in southern China. But it's difficult, if not impossible, to travel right now. I'm trying to get into China with some scientists right now. I want to come back to Italy. Italy is a very important part of the COVID-19 story. I want to go to the Republic of Korea. I want to go to Singapore to investigate the story of COVID-19 in those places. So I have to be able to travel, and I hope I'll be able to soon, because that's the kind of book that I like to write.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Chiara.
My question is about COVID-19. In your opinion, going back to the SARS epidemic in 2003, why didn't we use knowledge coming from what happened in that period, such as restrictions and atypical pneumonia?
Why indeed didn't we? Why didn't we learn from SARS-1 in 2002 and 2003? There's no good answer to that. We should have. The scientists recognized that SARS-1 was a warning shot. It was an alarm bell. It told us how a pandemic might begin. It told us how dangerous coronaviruses could be. There are scientists who study these diseases and who study pandemics that I've talked to from the Centers for Disease Control and other places who say that SARS-1, well, they said this to me, several years ago, SARS-1 was the scariest disease that they ever worked on. Not Ebola, not anything else, but SARS-1. And the reason they said it was so scary was because they said, if this virus had been a little bit different and we had been unlucky, this could have been a global pandemic. We were able to control SARS-1 with fast science and rigorous public health measures. It was in just a few cities. It came out of southern China, got to Hong Kong, got to the airport, spread around the world to Toronto and Beijing and Hanoi and a couple of other cities, Singapore. And then it was controlled. Partly because those particular cities had strong healthcare systems and strong governments who enforced public health measures. Toronto, Beijing, Hanoi, Singapore. If the virus had gotten into cities that did not have strong healthcare systems and did not have strong governments, it could have been a pandemic, they said. For instance, Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a wonderful country with wonderful people, but not with enough healthcare resources or coherent government. So there were warnings. SARS-1 was a warning. The scientists said this could have been much worse if, for instance, this virus was capable of spreading from people who were asymptomatic. And if that had happened, they said back then, this could have been terrible. So God forbid that we get another coronavirus like SARS, except that it has the capacity to spread from people who are asymptomatic, who are walking around feeling healthy. And so, bingo, here we are. SARS-2. That's one of the things that makes it so awful. We should have been developing vaccine platforms, generalized vaccines for coronaviruses that could have been modified quickly for a new coronavirus. We should have been developing diagnostic test kits that were reliable and that could be adapted quickly to a new kind of virus as soon as we had the genome, so that every airport, especially every international airport in the world, would quickly have had test kits so that people could have been tested positive or negative for COVID-19 in the time that it takes to go through airport screening. We didn't have those things. For me, in January, that was the most surprising thing about this pandemic. Not that it was a coronavirus, not that it was coming out of a bat in China, but that we were so unprepared. We didn't have those fast, portable diagnostic test kits at the airports, and we didn't have vaccines that could be quickly adapted to this virus. There was no excuse for it. It was a failure of political will and imagination.
My question is about the wet markets in China, because in your opinion, since wet markets in China are one of the main reservoir of outbreaks, hadn't we better interrupt these activities, or at least make more inspection for the treatment of these animal species?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Ilaria, and that has already been done in China. There have been new regulations instituted just this year. First of all, if I understand correctly, wild animals are not allowed to be brought to wet markets live in cages anymore. That was important to stop, and that has been stopped, in my understanding. Now, the question is whether that new law will be enforced and whether it will be retained over time. That's important, but that's a beginning at least. Also, some of the particular trade in wild animals, for instance, pangolins, who were suspected of maybe having a role in this virus, pangolins are no longer being, are now fully protected in China, fully protected. Again, it's a question of how well that's enforced. So these are changes that that are important, that China has instituted, that other countries need to institute, but it's tricky because there are two reasons why wild animals are captured and killed by people for food. One is that people in some areas badly need protein, and wild animals are the only protein that they can get. For instance, people who are living in villages and at the edge of the forest in Africa. And the other reason people eat wild animals is because it's a fashion. Affluent people think that there is prestige and there is vigor and health to be found in paying for someone to capture wild animals and kill them for you to eat. The second of those two is something that we need to eliminate with education as well as with laws. The first of those two, people in African villages who need protein, we need to deal with that not by passing laws and restrictions, but by offering alternatives, by development alternatives that can bring other sources of protein, animal protein or other kinds of protein, to those people in those remote villages. We have to have great sympathy for those people who do need protein to feed themselves and to feed their children. And the way to deal with that is to develop alternative opportunities for them.
Now I thank you very, very, very much, because we thank you for your word, your time, your thought, your sympathy, because we know that you are very busy, And now ask Silvia to close this intense meeting.
Hi, David. First, I'd like to thank you for giving us this really precious and unforgettable moment. And we are living now a very hard time all around the world. And we receive every day a lot of different messages, also divergent messages. So it's important for all of us to listen to the science. And today we had the great chance to do it directly from your voice. And I think we could learn very much today from you. And for example, we understood how much human beings and their activities play a key role in the biosphere, especially in the dynamics of zoonotic diseases. And so it's clear that it's our duty to think about it, and it's our duty also to behave responsibly. And you, in this way, you sent us a great message today, and we are very grateful for this. Thank you very much.
Silvia, thank you. Rita, thank you. Grazie mille. I really have enjoyed this. I've talked to a lot of audiences in the last 11 months, and I've talked to a lot of classes, high school classes, college classes, you know, in places where English is the first language rather than the second language. But this has been one of the very best. Your questions have been really, really good, and I appreciate that. You make me very glad that you invited me and that I had a chance to talk with you. I just wish I spoke Italian as well as you all speak English.